Australia is one of the most fossil fuel reliant countries in the world. In 2014, for instance, fossil fuels were used to produce 87% of our electricity. In contrast, only 13% was sourced from renewable energy, consisting mainly of hydro, wind, solar voltaics or PV, and biomass. Federal policy currently aspires to achieve an electricity supply where 23% of energy comes from renewable sources by 2020. Given the urgency in responses required to climate change, there is also much interest in a more ambitious 100% renewables target. However, there have remained questions about our ability to achieve a viable and functioning 100% renewables energy sector for a number of technical reasons. One reason for this is that electricity use by the Australian population may not occur when renewable energy is most available. For example, our highest household demand occurs during the evening when we all come home from work, but solar energy is generated during the day. It might also be windy on some days and not on others, but our electricity demand from day to day does not change significantly. Our current Australian energy system, which is largely reliant on coal, can give us electricity when we most need it because power stations can burn the energy stored in coal when the electricity is required. To have the same reliability, a 100% renewables electricity sector would also need to be able to supply power reliably when it is needed. One way to ensure that a 100% renewable energy production system is reliable across the day and the year is to store energy for when it is most needed. There are a number of types of renewable energy with which you can do this, such as concentrated solar, hydro and biofuels. Another option to ensuring that renewable energy power generation is reliable and able to match energy demand is to build more renewable power plants than are required at any one particular time, with an interconnected renewable energy transmission system across a large area. This means that areas with high production of renewable energy can share electricity to areas with more limited production. For instance, it may be very sunny or windy in one region, and excess electricity produced in this region can fill a gap in energy demand in less sunny and windy places elsewhere. Fortunately, the existing electricity transmission network in Australia is already highly interconnected across a grid that spans New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Queensland and Tasmania. Only Western Australia and the Northern Territory have electricity grids that are not connected because of the large distances from eastern population centres. Electricity in this grid is traded by the Australian Energy Market Operator, who matches supply with demand, choosing the most cost-effective generator at a particular time. So could Australia's electricity demand be served by a 100% renewable energy system using the existing grid? Are electricity generators in the right place to support renewable energy generation? Since many of our solar resources are found inland, large distances from the main population centres, will we lose large amounts of energy transporting it long distances to the coast where most people live? Another challenge of a 100% renewable energy system is idle power generators. Spare power generators can buffer variation in supply and provide reliability, but this also means that some of these generators will be sitting idle when natural resources such as wind and sun are not sufficient in a particular location and the electricity from a site is produced but not purchased because it is cheaper elsewhere. Without sufficient storage, there is also likely to be wasted electricity when there is an abundance of sun and wind for some generators but very little demand for that electricity at certain points in time. At the moment, there is very little spillage or leakage from our current electricity network because fossil fuels effectively store energy that can be released at the time demand actually occurs. Given these substantial challenges, is it possible to design such a 100% renewables power system in Australia that can function successfully? Our research is very encouraging, showing that it is indeed technically possible for Australia's current electricity demand to be supplied by 100% renewable energy using current technology. But how are these challenges to be addressed, and what would a 100% renewable energy system look like? Before we answer this, let's clarify what our findings can and can't tell us first. Firstly, we wanted to be very cautious with our study so that we didn't provide overly optimistic but misleading claims. To increase the confidence in our findings, we took a deliberately conservative approach to the assumptions we made. We did not try to predict what future electricity demand might be. This is full of uncertainties, but instead asked the question, could a 100% renewables energy system be possible and viable if it were superimposed in the current context of Australia's energy demand today? We assumed that there was no future improvements in technology from what is already available and viable currently. We also assumed that electricity consumption would not change. We also did not try to find one single best solution for a 100% renewables future for Australia. This is not possible because the best future depends on a highly uncertain future context, including prices for technologies and the price of carbon. The best way of dealing with this uncertainty is to investigate a range of possible futures and assess the viability of a 100% renewables future under this range of future scenarios. We investigated two important variations or future scenarios. The first is the storage of renewable energy. We assumed that biofuels are our most viable option for plugging gaps in energy shortages due to the inability of solar PV and wind generation to store energy. We chose biofuels over other types of generation as our preferred technology for storing renewable energy because we wanted to only investigate options that were currently technically feasible on a large scale. We assumed that second-generation biofuels are used because they don't compete with high-yielding agricultural food-producing areas. Biofuels do have well-acknowledged environmental, social and economic challenges, and more research is required to test if significant volumes of biofuels can be available. The important point is that the ability to store renewable energy is a critical part of a 100% renewables energy future. The second future scenario we investigated was carbon price. We were interested in this because the future carbon price is highly uncertain. We investigated a range of carbon prices from the current price of $0 to $1,000 per tonne. Now that we've clarified our research questions and the assumptions we made, let's look at what we did find. As the carbon price increases, the total installed capacity of generators across Australia also increases. This is because fossil fuels are pushed out of the market to be replaced by renewable energy. For example, in our simulation, coal, which is the black part of the bar graph, is excluded from the energy mix at a carbon price between $50 and $100 per tonne, leaving only natural gas, which is the grey part of the bar graph, to supply about 50% of electricity demand. A renewables-only system starts to establish itself beyond a carbon price of $500 per tonne. More installed capacity is needed as a greater fraction of the energy mix becomes renewable. This is because some renewable energy technologies, such as solar PV and wind, often don't operate at their full capacity due to variation in renewable resources and can't store electricity. More spare electricity generators are required to buffer variability. At a carbon price high enough for renewables to begin to dominate the energy mix, but when there are low contributions from biofuels, which is the green part of the graph, we can see that larger amounts of installed capacity are required. Without such storage capability from biofuels, there is a high reliance on hydro, which is the dark blue colour, and concentrated solar, which is the orange, to supply energy that can be stored and released when it is needed. Because further expansion of hydro is constrained, we require many spare wind and PV generators. In fact, a grid capacity of over 300 gigawatts, or 5 times what is currently installed today, to ensure electricity supply is reliable. In comparison, adding significant capacity to store energy with biofuel plants enables the generation of 100% renewable electricity with much less installed generation capacity, around 165 gigawatts, or 2 to 3 times what is installed today. This shows us how important it is to be able to store generated renewable energy. The greater the ability to store renewable energy, the less electricity is produced but then lost from the system because it is not required or price competitive at a particular time. When we are able to store enough renewable energy, only 20% of the energy generated is spilled or lost. Recent technological gains in energy storage are highly encouraging and may mean that the role of biofuel can be lessened as other viable technologies also play a part in renewable energy storage. To see what a 100% renewable system might look like, we investigated one particular future scenario that might come close to what could be implemented. Under this scenario, concentrated solar dominates, followed by wind and then PV. Electricity is generated at a cost of around 20 cents per kilowatt hour. Under this scenario, hydro and biofuel generators are concentrated in the more densely populated southeast of the continent. Most of the wind plants are situated around the coastline. Concentrated solar are mainly situated in the arid regions, and finally, we see that rooftop PV generators are concentrated in the more densely populated southeast of the continent, with utility PV plants mainly in the arid regions. Transmission losses are also low enough that new cross-continental linkages between Western Australia, the Northern Territory and the Eastern Australian networks could buffer local power variability. Although the possibility of 100% renewables in Australia has previously been tested and confirmed by other research, our highly detailed analysis across the whole of Australia at hourly time increments has meant that we have been able to test some of the remaining questions. Using a very cautious approach and conservative assumptions, we find that a 100% renewables energy sector is technically possible using technology that is available in Australia today. For those of you who would like to read the more detailed research paper, here is a reference, or you can email the corresponding author on the email address provided.